In today's video, I'll be talking about variables and start making a base for people new to programming. In the first 15 to 20 videos, my purpose is to bring them up to speed to a level where they can understand what I'm doing by the time we start working in Unity and start understanding the basics of Unity. With that out of the way, let's get started. To explain everything simply and break down the base structure of a C# script, without going into detail about classes, methods, or namespaces, let's look at this piece of code. Here, the largest part that is highlighted is the namespace. This is the name of the namespace, and everything between these curly braces is considered as being part of this namespace. Now, inside this namespace, we have this class, and inside this class, we have these variables and methods. Don't worry about what a namespace, class, or a method is right now, as we'll have dedicated videos about them later. So finally, having dug deep enough into the base structure of a C# script, we have reached the topic of today's video, that is variables. You can consider variables as data containers that will be used throughout your program to contain data. To give a real world context, suppose you are making an RPG game. Now in this RPG, your player character will have stats like name, strength, endurance, mana, charm, etc. that will be used by you to display and calculate various things in your game. Your game might also have various sorts of items and weapons that will all have their own stats and buffs. All these different stats need to be stored somewhere when your game is running, and that place is a variable. Now coming to the coding part, let me show you the syntax that will be used to declare a variable and assign a value to it. Private string player name semicolon player name equal to VP semicolon. If you look carefully at the syntax, it can be divided into three parts. First, access modifier, second, data type, and third, variable name. Access modifiers will decide the visibility of your variable to other parts of your program. That is, from where you would be able to access and modify this variable. Defining the access modifier is considered as being optional, but if you ask my opinion, do it every single time, as it will make your code much more readable. If you don't define an access modifier, then the variable, if it is a class member, will be private by default. Now again, don't worry about how all this works, we'll have dedicated videos about that later. Next comes the data type of your variable, which will decide what kind of data you can put inside the variable. If you try to put data inside your variable that is not compatible with the defined data type of your variable, then it will result into you getting an error. For example, if you try putting a string into a variable that is defined to be an integer, then you will get a compile time error. Now let's look at the different data types available to you when you are coding in C#. First is Boolean. A Boolean can store true or false values. You can use this to store data that can only have two sides. To give more context, let's go back to the RPG analogy and think about a town in this game, with houses that the player can go in and out of during a certain period of time, let's say from 9 AM to 5 PM. You can use a Boolean to set the state of the door, like private bull underscore is door open equal to true. After that, what you can do is, in the script that manages the game world time and day and night cycle, when the time hits 9 AM, you set underscore is door open to true, and at 5 PM you set it to false. And then in the script that allows the player to move in and out of the house, you can use this boolean to create a condition which will only allow the player to enter the house if underscore is door open is true, and will stop the player from entering the house if underscore is door open boolean is set to false. There are a lot of ways to make this into a much more flexible system, but this is just a basic example to explain in what sort of situation you would be using Boolean. Moving forward, let's talk about the four whole number data types, that is byte, short, int, and long. These four data types can be used to store whole numbers with varying amount of ranges as shown in the spec sheet. You can also see in the spec sheet that each of these data types will take varying amount of space in memory, with byte taking 1 byte, short 2 byte, int 4 bytes, and long 8 bytes. You have to make sure that the data type you are using for the variable has sufficient range for the purpose it was made for. Again, going back to the RPG analogy, we talked about you having to store attribute data for the player character, like strength, mana, endurance, etc. Now we can use all these data types to store something like that by doing private byte underscore strength equal to 5, private short underscore endurance equal to 3, private int underscore mana equal to 3, private long underscore player money equal to something. But if you know that your strength, endurance, and mana are always going to be positive values, and let's say are never going to be above 25, then it would be a waste of memory to use anything other than byte to store this sort of data. My reason for this lengthy explanation is that it is really easy to default to int data type for storing any whole number, and to be completely honest, I do that a lot. Making a habit of only using what you need from the beginning might save you some trouble down the line and will also make you a better programmer. Moving forward, as you might have noticed, we don't use any suffix when setting a value for byte, short, or int data types. But when you are setting a value for long data type, you have to suffix the value with the letter L. There is another concept that needs to be covered before moving to the next data type, and that is the concept of signed and unsigned when it comes to these four data types. So when you are creating a variable using short, int, or long keyword, what you would be creating will be a signed variant of short, int, or long, as the ranges of these data types cover both the negative numbers and the positive numbers. If you know that the variable that you are creating will only contain positive values, then you can declare these variables using the unsigned variants like private u short underscore weapon weight equal to something, private u int underscore loot xp equal to something, private u long underscore max xp equal to something. In case of byte, it is opposite, as by default byte is unsigned, and if you want to make a signed variant of byte, you will need to use the keyword sbyte like this, private sbyte underscore charm equal to 5. Another point that you might have noticed is that uint values need to be suffixed with the letter u, while ulong values need to be suffixed with ul. Next, we have the fractional data types, that is float, double, and decimal. All these three data types will store fractional values in these ranges. Although they might seem really similar, there is a difference between them that you should know of. Float and double both are not decimally accurate because they store value as binary floating point type, while decimal, on the other hand, has higher precision and is decimally accurate because it stores the value as a decimal floating point type. For this reason, though you will take a performance hit when using decimal data type, you definitely want to use it when doing critical tasks where precision is absolutely necessary, like when doing financial calculations. You can do more research on this yourself, but as you are watching this content on this channel, I will take it as you are developing a game, and for that purpose, you don't need such high precisions, and using float and double is just fine. Now, going to the code again, you can declare these data types like this: private float underscore float example equal to something, private double underscore double example equal to something, private decimal underscore decimal example equal to something. Moving forward, let's talk about the data types that you would be using to store text, that is char and string. Char data type can be used to store a single character, whether it be in form of Unicode, hex, or just a character, while string can be thought of as a sequence of characters and can be used to store any length of text, with the theoretical upper limit being 2 GB per string. Going to the code, you can declare an initialize char using single quotes like private char underscore char example equal to single quote a single quote. And string can be declared and initialized using double quotes like private string underscore string example equal to double quote this is your host VP double quote. Going to the RPG analogy again, you'd be using strings a lot, from displaying dialogues to using it in your menus and using it in your HUDs. Basically, any text that you see in your game will be using string in one form or another. Well folks, that does it for today's video. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you like the content. Do comment below if you have any doubts or if you just want to share your thoughts. And as always, if you see someone struggling down in the comment section, do try and help them. Goodbye for now. This is your host VP signing off.